is the NFL Draft, the 29th pick belonging to the New Orleans Saints, who secured Bryan Bresee, the defensive tackle from Clemson. We have got our Locked On Saints host, Ross Jackson. I am Jordan Black. But first, our NFL Draft coverage is presented by Ultimate Football GM. If you think you can run an NFL franchise, visit ultimate-gm.com to play the Ultimate NFL franchise simulation game and start your dynasty today. Ross, you just got off with Bryan, listening in from him, Dennis Allen as well. Take us through that presser right after he gets drafted in the first round and what you heard from the newest New Orleans Saint.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of excitement here in New Orleans and a lot of excitement here at the New Orleans Saints facility where I'm coming to you from today. We've got, Dennis Allen, the head coach, out here saying that, he was one of two guys that was left on the board when the Cincinnati Bengals were up. So they just knew that they were going to be able to, walk away with them. Defensive interior was such a big need for them. So they feel like they've really addressed that, or at least started to address it here. It's not necessarily a position that I wouldn't rule them double dipping, rule out double dipping when it comes to that spot. And then when it comes to Bryan, I mean, he's very excited, obviously, to hear that name, to hear his name and to get that phone call. He and a bunch of the Saints brass met along with a couple of other Clemson players while they were all in Clemson during the pro day. And it was clear that there was a lot of interest there. He knew very well that the New Orleans Saints, when they hit the clock at 29, that they could be one of the teams that called his name. And look, he's a guy that's managed adversity, that's been through a lot. And so to be able to get to this point to where his name gets called, he gets that phone call, it was a monumental moment for him and his family.
Yeah, can you speak a little bit to what he's been through and what folks can learn a little bit more about Bryan and what he brings to the Saints organization, not only on the field, but off of it?
Yeah, I mean, goodness gracious, the stuff that this poor guy has gone through. I mean, he had a fantastic rookie season, came into Clemson as the number one recruit across the entire nation. He was one spot ahead of the guy that went number one overall in this year's draft, and Bryce Young, and he gets to Clemson and he's the ACC Defensive Rookie of the Year. And then the second season, he has an ACL tear, comes back after that. And at the beginning of the 2022 NFL season, his little sister Ella passed away at the age of 15 after an 18-month fight with a very aggressive form of brain cancer. And so we have to think about not only that moment in September of 2022 when she did pass away, but the 18 months prior and the every day ever since then that has been part of the adversity that he's had to manage. And he went out there and had his second best season, although he dealt with some fluky injuries, kidney infections, things like that during his senior year. I mean, you name it, this guy has been through it and he's navigated it and he's always come out on top of it. And when we spoke to him today, you can see the character, you can see the makeup, which is a big thing that the New Orleans Saints really focus on. Not only how can you contribute off the field, Jordan, but as you said, what can you do in the locker room? How can you be a leader to some of these other players? This is a guy that is a born and bred leader and should be able to also have a major impact on the field in the defensive interior, a place where the New Orleans Saints needed to address going into this draft and do it with a guy that they really, really love in Bryan Bresee.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned how important that will be for the locker room, but we do know that there is a glaring defensive need for this team. So how much of an impact can he make right away, or just at least how much growing can he do as part of this Saints organization?
Yeah, I think a lot of folks look at him as a guy that is a very effective pass rusher on the interior, but has some strides to make in the run game. I think, he was pretty aware of that himself as well, which is another piece of the quality character cake that the New Orleans Saints or pie really like to take a slice out of is, are you aware of your strengths and weaknesses? And he absolutely has that. And so I think, you look at him as somebody that's probably going to see a heavy amount of work his rookie season. I mean, he's a plug and play kind of guy in the interior. The Saints lost. They had a big, massive exodus on their defensive line over the course of free agency. They brought in a couple of new guys in Colin Saunders and Nathan Shepard, who give you some attacking, penetrating three tech and, a big time run stopper that can also, is very athletic and can get productive in the pass rush game as well. And Colin Saunders, and you pair him up with those guys to where the Saints can continue to use their heavy rotation. But I mean, I think Bryan Bresee is going to see a lot of snaps his rookie season, and he has the ability to really make an impact, especially now with a guy like Bryce Young twice a year in the division. Those smaller quarterbacks, the key to beating those guys is to get pressure immediately up the middle. So a guy like Bryan Bresee sees his draft value become even more important because of the selection that happened at number one overall in the same evening.
You mentioned not being worried that they filled one defensive hole and that they might not be worried about double dipping there. Do you see them filling those other defensive needs as the draft continues? 7 more picks. What does New Orleans need to do to ensure that this is a successful 2023 draft?
Yeah, I think you keep building in the trenches, and I think that's going to be a big focus for this New Orleans Saints team, whether that's over on the offensive side or on the defensive side. They have the 9th selection in the second round at pick 40 overall. That's a spot where they could go offensive line with a guy like Florida offensive guard Osiris Torrance still on the board, Steve Avila, another guard that's still on the board out of TCU, Cody Mauk, a guy that would be a tackle guard transition coming out of North Dakota State University. Those could all be good selections, or they could still address their defensive line and go to the edge. A local guy here, BJ Ojulari out of LSU, premier pass rusher. He's still on the board. They could go to a guy like Isaiah Foskey out of Notre Dame as well, who checks all the boxes in terms of their prototypes and productivity and athletic testing. So I think that the next step for them is just to continue to build where they have cared so much. I mean, you look all the way back to, gosh, they've used one of their first 2 selections on either offensive line or defensive line for the last, I want to say, near decade at this point. So I think they can continue to focus in on those spots, whether it be on the offensive side or the defensive side.
Absolutely. Well, for more on the Saints, be sure to tune in to Locked On Saints as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Ross, thank you for your insight. We appreciate it. And we will chat with you tomorrow.